Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about the continued fallout of the meeting between Donald Trump and President Zelensky that was held in the White House at the end of February, because as a result of that falling out, the minerals deal was not signed, and as a result of that, Donald Trump then came out and said that the USA was pausing all military support to Ukraine. And obviously that was a major blow to the Allied forces, because the US has provided around 50% of all of the funding that Ukraine has been receiving and a lot of military equipment. And it was later confirmed that the USA had also paused all intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And this pause in support from the USA raises the question as to whether or not Donald Trump is going to provide any further support to Ukraine. And what we've seen is that the European countries have now been rallying around. They've held a meeting and confirmed that they now intend to increase their defence spending to make up for some of the shortfall coming from the loss of the support from the USA. And following a meeting of the 27 countries of the European Union, during which Hungary was the only country that abstained in terms of increasing their support for Ukraine, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orbán, said that if Europe now has to support Ukraine without the ongoing financial and military support from the USA, it is going to ruin the countries of the European Union, because they are going to have to increase their defence spending so significantly that it could throw many of these economies straight into recession. This chart produced by the Kiel Institute shows the breakdown of military, financial and humanitarian support provided by major countries to the end of December 2024. And what this chart shows is that the United States has been the biggest single donor so far, providing 64.1 billion euros worth of military support and 46.6 billion euros worth of financial support. Now that compares to $46.4 billion provided by the European Union for financial support. The European Union doesn't actually provide any direct military support. That's been done by the individual countries. And you can see that the biggest of those has been Germany, who provided 12.6 billion euros of military support so far, followed by the United Kingdom, who provided just over 10 billion euros. Denmark have provided 7.5 and the Netherlands 5.8. And you can see from this chart why Donald Trump has repeatedly said that the USA has been providing more support than Europe, and he believes that that needs to be equalised now, and that's one of the reasons why he's paused the support to Ukraine at the moment. And I think this chart is really interesting, which shows the quarterly breakdown of how that aid has been provided to Ukraine. And you can see that in the final quarter of 2024, when Joe Biden was coming to the end of his presidential campaign, and it was obvious that Donald Trump was likely to cut back on the amount of money being committed to Ukraine, that there was a huge ramping up in terms of the amount that was given in that quarter. You can see that it's disproportionate to all of the other quarters since the war started at the beginning of 2022. However, as this chart shows, there is a difference between the amount of military support that's been committed and the amount that's actually been dispersed. So you can see that the USA has actually dispersed 29 billion euros worth of support, but the other 46.6 billion shown here is committed but not actually dispersed. So Donald Trump is looking to withdraw that support so that it's not actually provided. And interestingly, if we look at the European Union countries, you can see that they have dispersed 42.4 billion euros so far and have a further 46.4 committed. And that obviously excludes the United Kingdom, which isn't part of the European Union. Now, one of the questions that's been raised in Europe following Donald Trump's pausing of support for Ukraine is what would happen if Russia invaded another European country that was a member of NATO? Would the USA automatically join in support of that country, or would Donald Trump look at it on a case-by-case basis and decide that maybe the USA didn't want to get involved in any of those conflicts? And if that happens, then obviously Europe would be left to fend for themselves. They would have to form their own defence forces. And this has caused the leaders of Europe to come together and agree that they need to increase the amount that they're spending on defence. And I think this is an interesting question, because Donald Trump has previously said that the USA was not going to defend NATO members if they didn't commit enough of their GDP to defence spending. This chart shows the percentage of GDP being invested into defence spending by the NATO countries, and the green line across the middle of this chart is the NATO guideline of 2%. That's what they've told all NATO members they need to be investing into defence spending. Now, if we start off by looking at the left-hand side of this chart, which shows the countries that are spending the highest percentage of GDP on defence, you can see that Poland actually ranks at the top of the list, spending more than 4.1% of its GDP, followed by Estonia at 3.43%, the United States at 3.38%, Latvia 3.15%, Greece 3.1%, and Lithuania is the only other country spending more than 2.5% of its GDP on defence. Now, we've got a whole host of other countries in the middle section of this chart that are spending at or around 2%. However, on the right-hand side, we've got all of the countries that are lagging behind, and these countries potentially are at risk of not being supported by the USA because they're not meeting the NATO guideline. Well, in fact, Donald Trump previously has said that he thinks that the guidelines should be set at 5%, not 2%. But interestingly, the USA isn't investing 5% of its GDP into defence, it's 3.4%. So obviously the US would need to ramp up its own spending if it was to set a target of 5%. But if we look at the countries that are currently below that green line, that are spending less than 2% of their GDP, they are Croatia at 1.8%, Portugal at 1.6%, Italy 1.5%, Canada 1.4%, Belgium, Luxembourg and Slovenia 1.3%, and Spain is at the very bottom of this chart, only spending 1.28% of its GDP on defence. Now, over the past week or so, the leaders of European countries have been talking a lot about defence spending, and Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, confirmed that the UK is increasing its spending to 2.5% of GDP, and it's going to fund that by cutting international aid to lots of different countries. So it won't be giving as much away, it'll be investing into equipment and defence. And the leader of France, Emmanuel Macron, has urged other countries to increase their spending to 3%. Now, obviously, a lot of them are a long way from that at the moment, and the NATO countries are also considering an increase to 3%. So what we're seeing here is a huge investment into the defence industry over the course of the next few years. And obviously that's necessary if you're running a country. You have to spend on defence to protect your borders and to make sure the countries like Russia are not going to invade. But the problem that you've got from an economic point of view is that you have to balance the books. You need to find that money from somewhere else. And for a lot of countries in Europe at the moment, they're already teetering on the brink of recession. There are difficult things happening in a lot of these economies, and increasing the amount that you're investing into defence isn't going to help because that's not going to give you a return on capital. This isn't like investing into infrastructure that maybe will generate revenue and create jobs and do things for the good of the nation and the good of your economy. This is, generally speaking, stockpiling weapons and investing into equipment that you may need at some point in the future to show that you've got that potential strength there if you need it. So this is going to put a lot of pressure onto European economies. And following the recent meeting of the leaders of the European Union, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, which is a member of the European Union, but who's refused to send weapons to Ukraine since the start of the war and has kept close relations with Russia, said that instead of prolonging the war, Europe should support Trump's peace talks. He said the way the European Union wants to support Ukraine now, whilst also boosting Europe's own defence spending, would ruin Europe. He said if now the USA quits financing the war, why would the other 26 member states have a chance to take this war to the end? Today it appears that I have vetoed, but within weeks they will come back and it will turn out that there is no money for these goals. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's happened over the course of the last week or so is quite extraordinary. We've seen Donald Trump falling out with the leader of Ukraine in the meeting in the White House, and following on from that, the USA has now paused all of its financial and military support and also intelligence support. And this is a major blow to Ukraine because, as we saw from the numbers, the the US has been providing a huge amount of military support. It was giving lots of equipment and lots of help to Ukraine in its fight against Russia. And so if the USA is now walking away from this support, if this pausing turns out to be a permanent arrangement because Ukraine won't agree to the peace settlement that Donald Trump is promoting, then it means that the European countries and Canada and Australia and the other allies will be left to do this on their own. They will have to support Ukraine. And obviously, as we saw from the figures, that would leave a huge black hole in the numbers. And what we've seen from the European Union is that they've pulled together, they've had a meeting and said that they're now committed to increasing the amount of GDP that they're investing into defence, and that they can borrow up to 150 billion euros. That's obviously all good and well from a big picture point of view. But from an economic perspective, how is it going to be funded? Because a lot of these countries are already struggling. They don't have hundreds of billions of dollars to spare to be able to start investing into defence equipment. And so the USA walking away from the support is really problematic from Ukraine's point of view, because these European countries don't have the available resources immediately to be able to fill the gap left by the USA. And also financially, it's going to put a lot of pressure onto those countries. And as we heard from the leader of Hungary, he believes that it could ruin Europe. Now, we have heard lots of positive messages from the individual leaders. A lot of people are saying, well, we can carry on without the USA. But it also raises the question as to what would happen if Russia decided to invade one of the NATO countries. Would the USA come along and support the rest of NATO? Or would Donald Trump say, well, actually, some of these countries haven't been paying enough in terms of defence spending, and so we're not prepared to join in any sort of fight against Russia or whoever it might be that invaded that country. And I think there's a lot of nervousness going on at the moment in Europe that the relationship with the USA is now under question. Whether or not the USA will definitely come and support European countries if Russia decided to start pushing other borders back is a big question, and nobody knows the answer to this at the moment. So the overall summary of today's video is that the USA pausing its support for Ukraine is now putting additional pressure on Ukraine and the European countries. The leaders of Europe have said that they're going to increase the amount they're spending on defence, but how is that going to be funded? And what is going to be the damage on all of their economies? So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. Thank you also to everybody that's supporting the channel. If you've bought me a coffee, thank you for that. If you've sent me a YouTube super thanks, really appreciate it. And if you've signed up as a Patreon or a YouTube member, I really appreciate that long-term support. Really helps to keep me going, keeps me motivated. So thank you to everybody for watching this video. And here's something to put a smile on your face.